Isabella and Her Enchanted Family, a fable for people of all ages, by Susan K. Ferrara Bartow, illustrations by Joseph A. Kemp, January 1st, 2015, Yardley, Pennsylvania. Forward. Before you read this story, I wish to make it clear that I didn't really write it all by myself. It all started one day when I was leaning my elbow on my kitchen table, resting my head on my left hand, just as it is right now, when my dear granddaughter Isabella said, "Ma, tell me a story." Without a moment of hesitation, I said, "Once upon a time, there was a lovely young girl named Isabella." And that was it. The story just wrote itself in 7 days, as if by magic, starting on New Year's Day, 2015. I just put it down on paper. It was inspired by my two precious granddaughters, Isabella and Melinda, and was written for Isabella's 16th birthday. It is dedicated to my dearest lifelong friend, Cecile M. Bell Morrow, my rock, my guide, my angel, my anchor, my heart, and to the memory of my beloved Wiki, whom I was so lucky to have known at all. Chapter 1. The Cottage on the Mountain. Once upon a time, there was a lovely young girl named Isabella. Isabella lived in a charming little cottage on top of a mountain, with a wonderful view of the mountains and sky above and the valley below. She lived there with a beautiful, gentle unicorn, a soft purring kitten, and a chattering, bouncing monkey, who never stayed still for 2 seconds put together. These three had all, at one time, been her family. The unicorn had been her beloved grandmother, the purring kitten was her mother, and the bouncing monkey was her father, who had always been hyperactive, so it was no big surprise that he still was. Isabella didn't know how they had come to be that way. All she could remember was that one morning, when she was a little girl, she woke up to find that they had, all three, been changed. At first, she hadn't realized who they really were and wondered where her family had gone. But soon, because of their behavior, she figured it out. The unicorn nuzzled her and whinnied softly, as her grandmother always had. The kitten purred and climbed onto her lap, and the monkey bounced and chattered endlessly. Grandmother, mother, and father. No doubt about it. The strange thing was that, although no one else was there, an unseen hand seemed to take care of and provide for all their needs. Every morning, when Isabella woke up, the cottage was clean, the dishes were washed, a warm fire was always burning, and delicious food, all prepared, appeared at mealtimes. The other chores were taken care of, too. It was a very unusual situation, but Isabella, as you can imagine, was most grateful for it. Chapter 2. If Only, If Only. Isabella loved her enchanted family enormously, and they spent all their time together. They would take walks every day, gather flowers, climb trees, and play hide-and-seek. Of course, she could always tell where the monkey was, because he just could not keep quiet. Isabella loved the monkey very much, as he kept her constantly amused, and she would laugh at the tricks he played and the faces he made. But sometimes his constant manic energy made her a little crazy. And the unicorn was too big to find a place to hide, so it worked out best when Isabella did the hiding and the rest of them did the seeking. At night, the kitten, who was always in her arms or on her lap, would cuddle up next to her in bed, with the monkey down at the bottom. Even the unicorn slept in the cottage, lying on a big, soft, fluffy rug at the foot of the bed, keeping watch over everyone. They had all their meals together and looked forward to whatever tasty dish would show up next. It really was a very happy way of life. Their favorite thing to do was to lie in the lovely garden behind the cottage and look at the cloud formations in the sky. Isabella would say, "Oh, look, that one looks like a rose," or, "Doesn't that one look like a dog?" The unicorn would nod and nuzzle her, the kitten in her lap would purr, and the monkey would scamper around, jumping and chattering, paying no attention whatsoever, as usual. As the years went by, Isabella started to wish more and more that her family could actually speak to her, as she was starved for conversation. She so wanted to be able to find out about them, their stories about the things that had happened to them, and what it had been like for them when they had all been young, before she was born. She used to try making up her own stories about them, but it just wasn't the same. It made her so sad that it seemed as though she would never be able to get to know them as they really were, as they had been. And because there were no pictures of any of them in the cottage, she was starting to forget what they had looked like. That was the saddest part of all. And she wished and wished that they could all be changed back into her loving grandmother, mother, and father. But she had no idea how this could be done. Chapter 3. Magic John. One day, as they were lying in the garden, a huge, fluffy cloud, moving very quickly, suddenly stopped in its tracks right over them. And as they watched, they were amazed to see an old man floating down into the garden, using a battered old red umbrella as a kind of parachute. He wore a long black cloak, covered all over with glittering suns, moons, and stars, and a long pointed cap on his head. He had long white hair and a long flowing white beard. In fact, he looked very much like the picture of Merlin the magician that Isabella had seen in an old storybook about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. When he had landed, he brushed himself off, as he was covered in cloud wisps, and said, "How do you do, my dear? I'm Magic John, the Wizard of the Mountains." Isabella delightedly said, "Well, hello. It's so nice to meet you. You're the only company we've ever had. I thought you were Merlin the magician. You look so much like him." Magic John said, "Merlin? Oh, yes, of course. Merlin. Yes. Splendid chap, Merlin. Yes, a third cousin, twice removed. Haven't seen him in ages. Always used to send me a card on my birthday, but haven't gotten one for, must be 300 years now. Yes. He must be taking one of his long naps. He does that, you know." He spoke with a British accent, which was to be expected, seeing as how he was Merlin's third cousin, twice removed. Then he said that he'd seen them many times, all lying in the garden as he floated back and forth, and for a long time he'd thought that maybe they might need some help of some kind. Isabella explained about her enchanted family and how much she wanted to find a way to change them back into who they really were. Magic John said, "Oh, I see. Wish I could help you, my dear, but I just retired a little while ago. Was getting pretty rusty, don't you know? Accidentally turned my dog into a toad last year. Took him months to change back again, poor fella. Anyway, I thought I'd better hang up my wand before the Wizards' Union revoked my license altogether, what? So now I just float about, visiting friends, admiring the view. But see here," he continued, "it seems to me that you'll never get anywhere stuck up on this mountain all on your own. You should go down into the valley and see if you can find some help there. Nothing happening up here, what?" Isabella said she thought that sounded awfully dangerous, since the road down the mountain was very rough, and almost impossible to travel, as it was practically straight down. Magic John said, "Well, my dear, I'm sure your unicorn can carry you safely. They're very special creatures, you know, have a sort of special magic all their own. And once you're down, I'm sure you'll find someone to help you, what?" Isabella was just about to ask what kind of magic when Magic John said, "Well, must be going now, my dear. Best of British to you. See you again one day. If I could remember where to find you, what? Well, chitty bye." And he hooked the handle of his umbrella into a low passing cloud and floated off as suddenly as he had come. Isabella, not knowing what to think, said, "Well, my goodness!" She paced up and down the garden for a long time, trying to decide what she should do. Finally, she asked her family if they thought they should all go down the mountain, as Magic John had suggested. The unicorn nuzzled her and nodded her head as she pawed the ground. The kitten jumped into her arms, purring loudly and licking her face, and the monkey scampered around, chattering and jumping up and down. Typical man, Isabella thought, no help at all. She didn't know exactly what made her think that, but she had a strong feeling that it was true. But she also had a strong feeling that going down the mountain was the right thing to do, since, as Magic John had said, they certainly weren't getting anywhere up here, all alone on top of the mountain. Chapter 4. The Journey Down the Mountain. Isabella had never planned on taking a journey anywhere, so she needed to stop and think about what they should bring with them. First, she packed a bag of warm clothes, summer clothes, blankets, boots, and an umbrella, since she didn't know what the weather would be like when they finally got down to the valley. Then she gathered enough food to last them 2 or 3 days, and a jug of water and bowls so that everyone would be able to drink. She put all these things into saddlebags and strapped them onto the unicorn's back. She couldn't think what else to bring and hoped she wasn't forgetting anything important. She took a long, deep breath, crossed her fingers, and mounted the unicorn, with the kitten on her lap and the monkey chattering behind her. She gently clucked her tongue, and the unicorn started down the mountain path. Although the path was in terrible shape, filled with holes, ruts, and rocks, the unicorn was completely sure-footed and never stumbled, even though the path seemed to drop straight down to nowhere. She really did seem to have special powers, as Magic John had said. It seemed like a miracle that she could carry them all with such ease and never take a wrong step or lose her balance. Isabella was simply amazed, as she'd had no idea that the unicorn had this ability. Good old Grandma, she thought. I should have known she'd come through like this, but I forgot how strong she always was. Chapter 5. The River. After about an hour of riding, Isabella started to get pretty tired. Her back hurt, as she wasn't used to such a long ride, so she asked the unicorn to stop. She got down and poured bowls of water for everyone. They all lay on the grass by the side of the path and nibbled on some snacks, too. After she had rested for a while and felt better, Isabella got up and walked towards a grove of brightly colored, flowering bushes. She pushed the branches aside, and there, just below them, flowed a beautiful river. The river bank was lined with lovely, sweet-smelling flowers, and when the sun broke through the clouds, the water sparkled with light. "Oh, look!" cried Isabella. "A river! We're almost there! Oh, let's go, let's go!" So they all jumped on the unicorn's back again. They were all so excited and could hardly wait to reach the river. They rode for another 15 minutes or so, and suddenly, without warning, a gorgeous valley stretched out before them, full of flowers, trees, and meadows with tall grass. The only thing that was missing was a bridge. There was no way to get across the river. "No bridge?" cried Isabella. "Oh, no! How are we going to get across?" The unicorn gave a long, loud whinny, nodded her head up and down, and pawed the ground like a racehorse. "Grandma," said Isabella, "are you saying that you can swim across? It's a long way for you to carry all of us. Do you really think you can?" The unicorn continued to whinny, nod, and paw the ground, her harness bells ringing loudly. "I love you, Grandma," Isabella said, "and I'd rather go back up the mountain than lose you. Please don't do it unless you're really sure." The unicorn whinnied, nodded, and pranced in excitement, raring to go. Isabella took another really deep breath and said, "Okay, let's go." The unicorn slowly walked down the bank and into the river. The kitten clung to Isabella for dear life, and the monkey sat on the unicorn's head, holding on to her horn and screaming his head off. Soon they were in deep water, but the unicorn managed to keep them above it as she swam. Isabella's legs were in the water, but she hung on tight and kept saying, "You can do it, Grandma. We're getting closer. You can do it. I can see the other side. You can do it. We're almost there." And with that, the unicorn gave a mighty leap into the air, out of the water, and landed safely on the riverbank. "You did it, Grandma," cried Isabella. "We're safe." But no sooner did she say that than they saw what they had been too far away to see on the other bank. They were anything but safe. Crocodiles were swimming in the river. Snakes slithered all around them, and huge swarms of stinging flies engulfed them. The unicorn whinnied and swished her tail frantically, trying to keep the flies away. She reared up on her hind legs, trampling on the snakes and killing as many of them as she could. Isabella and the others were terrified. It had never occurred to any of them that this side of the river would turn out to be so dangerous and awful. It had all looked so lovely from the other side. Chapter 6. Melinda. Suddenly, just as a crocodile was climbing out of the river and heading straight for them, the reeds on the river bank parted, and there, a lovely young girl with long dark hair and beautiful green eyes was standing before them. She wore a long, flowing, dark green dress and a glittering golden necklace. Isabella thought she looked like a fairy princess and couldn't imagine what she was doing in this awful place or where on earth she had come from. The girl gave a wave of her hand, and the crocodile immediately turned around and went back into the river. The snakes slithered away, and the swarms of flies disappeared. Isabella was dumbfounded. It seemed that the girl had appeared out of nowhere just when they really needed help. But before she had a chance to speak, the girl said, "Oh, there you are. I was looking for you. Sorry I was late, but I wasn't sure exactly where to find you." Isabella said, "How did you know we'd be here? And how did you make those horrible creatures disappear like that?" The girl said, "Oh, my grandmother put an enchantment on me so that none of them can hurt me. Her name is Cecile. She's a good witch and the wisest woman in the valley. She sent me to meet you and to take you to her cottage. You're Isabella, aren't you? I'm Melinda. Shall we get going?" At that point, the unicorn nodded and whinnied and pawed the ground. She nuzzled Melinda, who stroked her and put her arms around her neck, hugging her as if she knew her. Isabella was so amazed at this turn of events that all she could say was, "Oh, yes, we'd love to. Thank you so much." And off they went, with Melinda leading the way. Isabella got off the unicorn as she didn't think that it would be polite to ride while Melinda was walking. As they traveled away from the river on a country path, the colors of the valley burst all around them. The sun lighted up the flowers in the meadow they walked through. Bunnies hopped and played all around them, and young deer came right up to Melinda, who stroked and petted them. Isabella was able to pet them too, and couldn't believe how friendly and unafraid they were. Isabella asked Melinda how her grandmother had known they were coming, but Melinda just said, "Oh, she'll explain it all to you when we get to the cottage. It's not far. We'll be there soon." And with that, they got to the top of the hill. And there, right below them, Isabella could see a magical-looking cottage surrounded by beautiful, blooming trees. Chapter 7. Cecile. The sun glistened so around the cottage that it seemed to glow. As they got closer, Isabella saw a beautiful woman with long blonde hair standing at the door. The woman ran up to them and threw her arms around the unicorn, who whinnied and nuzzled the woman as if she would never stop. The woman kept murmuring, "My friend, my dear, dear friend, I've missed you so much." Isabella was amazed to see that both the woman and the unicorn were crying for joy, and felt tears welling up in her own eyes. After a few minutes, the woman turned to Isabella and said, "I'm Melinda's grandmother, Cecile, Isabella. Your grandmother, who was a good witch too, was my dearest friend. Let's all sit down, and I'll tell you the story of how she and your mother and father came to be enchanted." They all settled down on the grass and waited for Cecile's story, knowing that she'd be telling them what they had come down the mountain to find out. "Long ago," Cecile said, "your grandmother was so happy living with your mother and father. And when you were born, she was overjoyed. Melinda and I used to sit with her and watch you all laughing and playing. We'd all prepare our meals together and go on long walks every day. And at night, we'd put you to bed and sing lullabies to you. You were like an angel to us, and we all loved you very much." Chapter 8. The Evil Witch. "One day," Cecile continued, "an evil old witch came into the valley and saw us all together. And that witch was so eaten up with jealousy and rage at the happiness she saw, which she had never had, that she cast a spiteful spell on all of you. Her black magic was very strong, so I wasn't able to change your family back to who they really were. The evil witch also whisked you up to that cottage on top of the mountain so that you'd all be alone up there, and Melinda and I would never see you. We could not come to you. You had to come to us. But one thing I could do was to cast a spell of comfort so that all your needs would be taken care of." "So it was you," cried Isabella, "who prepared all the meals and cleaned the cottage and kept the fire going?" "Yes," said Cecile, "it was me. And since you were such a little girl when the witch cast the spell, I knew it would take 10 or more years before you would be grown up enough to want more than just to play with your family as the pets they had become. I knew that one day you would very much want them to become themselves again, so that you could really know them as your dear family, as the human beings they had been. That's why I sent Magic John to visit you and encourage you to come down the mountain." "You sent Magic John?" cried Isabella. "He never mentioned you." "No," said Cecile, "I told him not to. He's a very dear old friend and visits us often. He knew about you and your family and had wanted to help for a long time, but I told him that you should make the decision to find the answer yourself, not just because Melinda and I were down here waiting for you. He was told to drop a little hint about your grandmother's magical powers, but that was all. You needed to have the courage to go and find the answer for yourself, not knowing who or what to look for. And you had that courage, Isabella. That's why you're here, because of your love for your family and the courage to risk your life to help restore them to their real selves. The evil witch conjured up the crocodiles, snakes, and stinging flies to keep you from ever getting to me. But she didn't know that my magic was strong enough to cast a spell of protection over Melinda. When Magic John left you, he floated back here to tell me you'd be arriving soon, so I sent Melinda to meet you. He said he was visiting friends, said Isabella, but he never said who. He never said he knew who I was or told me about the witch's evil spell. Just so, said Cecile. All that was left for you to find out for yourself, and now you have. Chapter 9. How can the spell be broken? Isabella said, But how can the spell be broken? You said before that the evil witch's black magic was too strong for you to reverse it. Cecile looked at her for a little while and finally said, That's right, Isabella. I can't break the spell. Only you can break it. Me, said Isabella, but how? I don't know how to break a magic spell. You've always had the power to break this one, my dear. You just didn't know you had it, said Cecile. But how? Isabella cried, close to tears. Cecile took Isabella's hands in hers and looked deep into her eyes. Many years ago, she said, my wise old grandmother told me that the measure of a person's love was how much they were willing to give up for it. If your family is turned back into themselves, one day they will die, as we all will, and you'll be left to go on without them. If they stay as they are, they will always, your whole life, be at your side, loving you and never leaving you. But you will never get to know them as the human beings they really are. They'll never be able to speak to you or to live their lives as they were meant to. It's all up to you. All you have to do is to wish for them to change back, knowing that you will lose them someday. Or you could just leave them as they are, and they'll be with you until the end of your days. The question is, do you love them enough to change them back into your family and let them have their lives back? If you do, one day you will face the loss and pain of having to let them go from this world. If you love them and need them so much that you can't bear the idea of feeling that pain, then wish never to lose them, and nothing will change. It's all up to you and the measure of your love. So you must think very carefully of what you really wish to have happen, because once you make that choice, it can never be undone. Chapter 10. Isabella's Choice. It was very quiet when Cecile finished speaking. Even the monkey had stopped his usual chattering and was actually sitting still. Everyone was completely silent, and all eyes were on Isabella. Isabella's eyes had gotten wider and wider as Cecile had spoken, and now she sat on the grass completely stunned. Her lips were parted, and she was breathing deeply. She looked at the unicorn, the kitten, and the monkey, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. She stood up and paced up and down for a long time, thinking and crying and wringing her hands. It was a terrible, frightening, heartbreaking decision to have to make. Finally, she stopped pacing and crying and stood very still for a long time. Then she turned back to her family. She hugged and kissed all three of them and then turned back to Cecile. "Have you made your choice, my dear?" asked Cecile. And very calmly, Isabella said, "Yes, Cecile, I have." "Then close your eyes, think of your family as you wish them to be, and make your wish," said Cecile. Isabella stood in the bright sunlight and faced her family. She closed her eyes, clasped her hands, and made her wish. And as she did, she felt a soft breeze and smelled the scent of roses. And when she opened her eyes, there before her stood her family, as the human beings they had once been and would now forever remain. Chapter 11. Ever After. Everyone hugged each other and laughed and cried at the same time. Isabella hugged her grandmother, who stood with her arm around Cecile's waist, her long black hair blowing in the breeze. "Oh, Grandma," cried Isabella, "I'm so glad to see you again. I hope I made the right choice." "Of course you did, my baby," said her grandmother. "I always knew you would one day. After all, you're my granddaughter, which makes you very smart. And you have a special magic all your own, too." No one could stop hugging, kissing, and talking excitedly to each other. After all, they all had so much catching up to do. And right in the middle of this joyful reunion, down floated dear old Magic John, still holding his old red umbrella. "Well, well, my dear," he said to Isabella, "glad to see you made it safe and sound. Knew you would. It's that old touch of family magic, what?" Isabella hugged him and Cecile and Melinda and thanked them over and over for helping her to get her family back. She had almost forgotten how beautiful her mother was and what a handsome father she had, and she smiled delightedly as they hugged each other. And in about a year, they presented her with a baby brother, whom she absolutely loved to pieces. She and Melinda became as close as sisters and were never apart. Her grandmother and Cecile conjured up a big, beautiful house where they all lived together. The two older women also spent all their time with each other and turned out the most delicious meals imaginable. Magic John was a very frequent visitor and amused them all with his magic tricks, even though he was getting more and more rusty. But they didn't care, as long as he didn't turn the baby into a pig or something. And after several years, Isabella grew up, and she, her brother, and Melinda all had families of their own. The big house glowed with the love they all had for each other and rang with the laughter of all their incredibly beautiful children. And they all lived happily together for many wonderful years. But, as Cecile had foretold, one by one, she, Isabella's grandmother, and her mother and father, all passed away from them. And although Isabella, her brother, and Melinda all cried and were very sad each time this happened, in the end, none of them felt any regrets, because they had all spent so many precious years together and were able to pass on their priceless memories of their parents and grandparents to their own children, who passed them on to their children, and so on through each generation. So they all lived on in everyone's hearts and minds, and were never really gone. So the message of this story is that you should cherish and enjoy every moment that you can possibly spend with your loved ones, for those precious moments will live on long after they have gone. The end. P.S. It's just a suggestion, but it would probably be a good idea to spend less time on your cell phones, social media, and playing video games, and spend as much time as you can with your family and friends, or at least call them so they can hear the sound of your voice. That way, you'll really get to know them and will be able to pass on your memories of them to your own children, as Isabella did. Just a suggestion. A strong suggestion.